G'day and welcome to the Grow a Small Business Podcast. I'm your host, Troy Truen. Each week, we speak with an owner who has grown a business with 5 to 30 team members to something bigger. Diving into their numbers and unearthing the pain they've experienced, we explore what they did to overcome each barrier and what they would do differently from day one. Let's get into it. Welcome everyone. Today I'm interviewing Henry Lopez from The How of Business. He's based in Palm Beach in the United States there in Florida. Thanks for your time today, Henry.
Oh, pleasure to be here, Troy.
Let's start with how we know each other. You reached out on our website, thought you might be a great guest. You've got a very storied career in business. I'm really looking forward to having a chat today and seeing what you can share with the audience to help them not make the mistakes you and I'm sure, have both made.
Looking forward to it.
We'll tell our audience a bit about your business, what it does and how it makes money.
Well, my current focus business-wise is The How of Business. So I'm a podcaster as you are, and so I do business coaching primarily and other relationships, affiliate relationships, and so forth. So there's various ways I monetize a podcast, sponsorships, affiliates, courses, and then the one-on-one coaching programs as well as group coaching. I'm currently a minority owner with my cousin who I coached as he was selecting a new business, and we opened a franchise called Office Evolutions in a suburb outside of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, which does co-working space, what we used to call executive suites. And we opened right smack in the middle of COVID, but we're doing well now. Didn't think it was going to survive, but we got through that. And then my wife has a travel consulting business that I help her with. So that's what I'm mostly focused on right now.
And with your coaching and your course, are there particular industries or stage of growth of businesses that you focus in on?
Across all industries, but micro businesses, small businesses similar to yourself. So I find that my audience is made up either someone who is aspiring to start their first business. They're probably in the corporate world like I was. And mostly they're looking for that inspiration to take that leap. And then secondly, it's a very small micro business owner, under 20 employees in that range, looking for how do they grow the business, take it to the next level. Very, very similar to your audience, I believe.
Yeah, they are 5 to 30 team members usually and trying to grow to that next level. And tell our audience a bit about your podcast. You've been mentioned before we hit record, going for 6 years now. Congratulations, almost episode 400.
That's right. Yeah, 378. I do a weekly episode and I love it. It's been a great, as we were chatting about before we started recording, it's been such a great opportunity to share. And of course, I can talk about business all day long, as my wife can attest to, and it gives me that outlet. But I've made such great connections, people that now I'm in business with, people that have become friends, and I've learned such a great amount because most of my, as your format is, as I interview experts or other business owners. So it's been a great learning experience.
And how did you start out?
It's a good question. My partner and I started with a co-host, David Begin, who has been my business partner on several business ventures. And I think it was his idea. We can't quite remember, but we thought, we enjoy sharing. We love being on stage, if we will. We had a sales career, both of us. We worked together in the 90s in software sales. In fact, I think I saw in your bio you worked for SAP at one point. Is that right? Did I understand that right?
PricewaterhouseCoopers doing, SAP.
So the last software company I worked for was Ariba, which got acquired by SAP. So similar paths there. But anyway, I think it was his idea. We decided to start this. We had a sister podcast that was specific to the car washing industry. We spun that off to the national and actually the International Association of the Car Washing Industry. And then he went off and did his own thing. And then I took over it. So it was kind of a joint idea and it just started to see what traction this got. I had no illusions of what it was going to do for me financially. I didn't go into it with that idea. And so, that's how we got started.
Maybe go back through your business journey or businesses. You mentioned you left corporate. So go right back to the start there, university, corporate job. And what was the catalyst for the jump?
Yeah, I always wanted to be my own boss, but never early on didn't know how and didn't have the resources. I did not graduate from college. I went to a technical school and became a computer programmer. This is back in the 80s. So I programmed in COBOL. So that dates me.
I've looked at COBOL programming when I was yes.
I loved COBOL programming because it's a very expressive language, right? It's all very self-documented, so it worked for me. And I did that, and I happened to have implemented a software system from what was then, there were two big players in the mainframe computing industry for enterprise resource planning solutions, McCormick and Dodge, and got the other name escapes me. But I ended up implementing that, and then I got a job working with them and transitioned into sales in the early 90s. And then I did that throughout the 90s. It paid very well, especially for somebody without a college degree industry. I was making very good money, but I always wanted to have my own thing. So in 1991, with a friend and business partner, we bought an existing pizza franchise. It was a local system, still exists in the Dallas area. And we bought an existing unit. The guy was desperate to get out of it. He took a personal note on it, which was the only way we'd have been able to afford it. I didn't have any resources, didn't have much credit, didn't have much money saved up, but we were able to get in there. We ended up owning 3 different units of this franchise throughout the 90s. Never could get it to a point where it could support me leaving my career. We were paying my business partner a salary, and then finally got out of that in the 90s. Then in the early 2000s, finally had gotten to a point where I had put enough money away, had a very beneficial IPO, part of Ariba, that helped me with putting some money away. And then I went into real estate, dabbled in that for a while because I wanted to get into residential real estate investment, did that. And then the rest of my family moved to Dallas and we wanted to do something together. So we ventured into, after a lot of research and trying and thinking about different ideas, we bought 2 existing, what are called here in the States, salon suites. And don't know if you have these in Australia or not, but I didn't know what they were until I got into this business. Essentially, think of it as executive suites, but for hairstylists, other cosmetologists, nail technicians. And so we were essentially a property management company. We had 2 locations. Each of them had about 37 suites. And we leased out these suites to these individual business owners to operate their own business. Yeah. We had just had one shared receptionist and then maintain it, collected a weekly rent. So we bought that business and we operated those 2 locations for 6 years. And then we sold that business in that same time frame. With my friend David Begin, we started a self-serve frozen yogurt business in Colorado Springs. You guys familiar with those? You serve yourself and then you pay by the weight kind of thing?
Yeah.
My daughter actually exposed me to that concept in Texas that had started to arrive. It started in the U.S., mostly on the West Coast, as a lot of these trends do. In California, South Korea influences originally, is my understanding. And my daughter said, Dad, I just went to this place. I don't know, she was 6 or 7 years old. And it's this and this and that. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. That's compelling. So I went to check it out and I thought, well, this is food, but we're not cooking anything, which I didn't want to go back to. Even after my experience with the pizza franchise, it seemed easy to, relatively speaking, right, for a food type establishment. It was fun. People went there to have a fun time. And so there were none in Colorado Springs. And we opened the first one that had 2 locations in Colorado Springs. One of them was very successful. We owned it for 10 years, just sold it a couple years ago. The second location was not successful. We had to close that. We can talk about that failure. So we did that. And then my business partner, David Begin, he had been in the car wash industry for quite some time, had 2 very successful car washes in Colorado Springs. And I had been involved with him kind of ad hoc. And then we opened a 3rd location together and then sold all 3 of those in 2019. What's been happening in that industry is a lot of consolidation. It's been predominantly a mom and pop type industry. And now there's a lot of private equity money coming in and building national chains for the first time. So did that, had a couple other smaller businesses. I just mentioned the Office Evolution franchise and my wife's business, and then the Howa business. I think those are the primary things.
Fantastic. Sounds like a very interesting and eclectic, a lot of different businesses and industries. So you would have seen a lot.
Exactly. Eclectic is a good word. People often ask me, is there a common thread? And I say, no, I've been opportunistic. I don't know that that's the right way necessarily. And there's been times when I've been trying to spin too many plates, too many things at once, because I do have that shiny object syndrome problem, as a lot of entrepreneurs, I think, do.
Yep, got the t-shirt.
And so it's just been a matter of, David would bring me an idea or we'd come across another idea. And so that's kind of how it's been so far.
Yep. And so when you jumped into your first business, the pizza franchise in 1991, how old were you then?
Let's see. I would have been 26 years old, 26, 27 years old, something like that.
Great. Same age as I when I went into my
Is that right?
Yeah, 26. And do you have some key numbers you can share to illustrate the growth of any of those businesses?
Yeah, those numbers, the growth there was the number of locations. We turned that location, which had been run into the ground. I remember very vividly when we did $1,000, this is 1992 timeframe, $1,000 on a Friday night, and we were exhausted because we had never done that kind of money. The crew was exhausted. We thought, oh my gosh, how did we just do $1,000 in pizza? Mind you, we're talking average ticket back then of maybe $15 So that was a lot of pizzas that went out the door that night. We grew that business and sold it. I can share now because it's been so long. I think I bought it for like $40,000. The owner took a note and I sold it 10 years later. It was profitable the whole time and sold it for like $150,000. So no, we're not talking big numbers, but it was a great first step. The salon business, which much more successful, and those numbers are much more fresh in my mind, that with the 2 locations, we were just under $1 million in US revenues. And then we bought it, like I said, and sold it for more than we bought it for close to, I think the multiple was 3.5 at that point in time.
On EBITDA.
A multiple of EBITDA. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Fantastic.
Yeah.
And what about number of team members in any of those businesses?
So let's see, the pizza locations, each of them probably we had, and that was a lot of part-timers, right? But we probably had 10 to 15 employees at each of them. At the car wash business, we probably had 10 per location times 3, so about 30 employees there, which was one of the things that attracted me to the salon business. There we had 1 employee per location. And, those early experiences taught me a couple of things that I look for as far as criteria. Low employee headaches, if possible, and also having no inventory and no receivables. And so the salon business had that. I haven't had to worry about receivables much in many of my businesses, so that's great. But that was one of the things that appealed to me about the salon business.
Yeah, fantastic. When was the moment you felt like you had succeeded?
That's a tough one for me, Troy, because I have struggled always with this kind of externally influenced definition of what success is. And when I started the yogurt shops, we created that brand from scratch. There were franchises available and we evaluated a couple of franchises. But at that point in time in both of our business careers, we certainly felt we had enough experience to do our own, develop our own systems, our own brand, or so. And we got help, obviously, from designers and so forth. But to me, that was, even though my goal was to have hopefully franchised that concept and that did not happen, that was a success because we were able to create something that even 10 years into it, people would walk in and say, is this a franchise? And so that business really helped me feel successful as to doing a business. Not necessarily because of the financial aspects, although it was profitable, but because of that, being able to create something, put it out there in the marketplace and have it so well received.
Yeah. And what does success look like to you these days?
It's about freedom of location and it's about freedom of time. And that has been the primary driver for me since day one. So when I was finally able to leave my corporate career, I traveled a lot, as you do in sales, right, and consulting. And fortunately, the timing was good. My daughter, when I left my corporate career, was still preschool, so age 4. Immediately after that, we bought an RV, a recreational vehicle, and did trips around the country for a better part of a year. And then I don't recall a significant event in her school year, she's 24 now, that I missed out on because I was gone or that I didn't have a choice about attending. To me, that's success.
That's great. Well done.
Thank you.
Number one thing you'd recommend to marketing a fast-growing business?
Understanding your target client, your ideal client, your avatar, whatever you want to call it. The biggest mistake I see often with small business owners is they want to be everything to everybody. And what I have found is if you niche down, at least initially, you're more likely to have success. So the more that we understand the customer or the client, or whatever the situation might be, or the patient, I think that's the key to then making the right decisions about marketing.
Yeah. How did you fund your businesses? You mentioned the pizza franchise. You didn't really have resources there. So it sounded like it was vendor finance. You mentioned a note.
The seller financed it, yeah. And the way I came upon that, which has been, again, back to the point of opportunistic, my partner that I alluded to, Renee, he had worked for this same franchise. They had multiple locations through high school and through college. So he knew how to operate one of these. And so we were able to leverage that expertise. I had no idea how to operate a pizza business.
And any other funding options? I assume along the way you've tapped some bank finance, but no other investment.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that one was definitely seller note and savings. Then the second one we opened, we were able to get a bank loan, a traditional bank loan. It was for a small amount. The third one also was seller financing. The salon business, I financed by borrowing against my investment assets and cash. The car washes were funded through SBA, Small Business Administration loans. So SBA-backed loans.
I only found out about that a few months ago. It's an amazing scheme in America, Small Business Administration. One of the guests told me he's already sold 2 of his own businesses because the SBA will loan the money to the purchaser to buy your business, which I think is
correct.
That's great.
And they actually prefer existing businesses because they can look at the financials and the track record. So while they will lend money for new businesses, as we did with all three of the washes, the car washes were funded by SBA loans. Yeah, it's a magnificent program. The other advantage is, although there are some upfront fees that can be rolled into the loan, but the term can get 15, 20 years. So a very favorable term on these loans is the other advantage.
Yeah, very smart by the government because they're protecting jobs.
And what it is, the program, is some people don't quite understand. The loan actually comes from a bank, but the SBA guarantees, I think, is up to 70% of that loan.
Yeah, right.
So if I default, the bank is not out the entire amount. And usually you're able to get about 70% financing, sometimes 80%.
If you were to start up today with plenty of funding, would you go into your industry?
Well, we're thinking about opening perhaps a second location of the shared office space. I do think that is an industry that has a lot of opportunities because of where we're ending up in, at least in the States, in a more hybrid model for people working not from home necessarily, but closer to home. So that has a lot of appeal. So I think there's a lot of money to be made there. I'm very interested in other industries as well. I almost got back into the salon industry, but couldn't find the right space. We were actually pretty far down the path in negotiating with the landlord. And then at a certain point when it went up to corporate, they said, oh no, the anchor store there has right of first refusal and they don't want that next to you because of parking considerations. So that stopped that. But that's a business that I think there's still opportunity for. The car wash industry is still interesting, although there's a lot of competition in most markets right now. So that has changed. I'm working with David Begin to some extent in doing consulting into that industry. And then the other industry that I've looked at very carefully is what we called in the States, the coin operated laundry. I don't use coins anymore, but the laundry mats. What we're seeing, at least in the States, is it used to be that those were in the lesser parts of town, the more economically challenged parts of town, but that's changing quite a bit. We're seeing them now be very successful in different parts of town that span the whole economic range. So that's one that I've been keeping an eye on and looking for opportunities as well.
Can you outline the most stressful point in your small business growth journey so our audience can learn from it?
There's lots of them, but one that comes to mind is, I alluded to before, the second location of the yogurt business was not a success. We were breaking even, so we didn't lose money, but when the lease came up, which was a 5-year lease for us in the retail shopping center that we were in, we decided to shut it down. And that we took a loss there because we had all of that investment and finish out and equipment. And as it is in the restaurant business, at least in the States, when you go to sell all that equipment, you get pennies on the dollar. So that was a big blow. That was a big failure. That feeling of failure, even though it wasn't catastrophic economically, it's embarrassing, it's demoralizing. And so I think that's one that still hurts when I think back about it.
Yeah. And what was the root cause there? Was it just location or was it personnel issues? Or
it was location. So that's the tricky thing. That's why I'm always so cautious now when I advise people, if they're going the route of a brick and mortar location, to try to, and I think that most businesses now, Troy, we can do the MVP approach or the start small. I mean, even in the restaurant industry, I see people now doing pop-ups and kitchens and catering or food trucks. Almost all businesses, except for the car wash industry, right? I can't do a pop-up of a car wash. So there are exceptions. But yes, it was location. And the interesting is that we were experienced business owners. We had a commercial broker that worked with us. We thought this shopping center was great. It had two major anchors at either end, a grocery store, a very popular grocery store chain in Colorado, a Kohl's department store at the other end, great out parcels of restaurants. But now what became so evident 5 years into it is we were lost in the middle of this big shopping center where people either came in or out at one of the other ends of the shopping center. And if they were crossing in their cars, as everybody does, there wasn't much foot traffic. They were just trying to make sure they didn't hit anybody. In hindsight, it was obvious. We didn't see that. We missed that. And the people we got advice from missed it as well. That space, by the way, 7 years later is still sitting empty. Maybe that should have told us something.
No. Yeah, right.
Yeah. We're talking about small space, 1,500 square feet. So we're not talking about a big footprint. Yeah. So you can imagine in a big strip shopping center, as we call it, we got lost in that center.
What area in business do you feel you've had to work on the most to add the greatest value?
I have had to work the most on probably my interpersonal skills, my leadership skills, because I tend to be more of the type that worked best in my corporate career with other people who were self-directed, who were motivated. And so as I've had a lot of businesses where I've had hourly wage employees, I've had to learn what motivates them. As I've had a younger workforce, we've had to both learn David and I, what motivates them. And certainly, at least in the States, COVID has even impacted that even further with the whole people not wanting to come back to work and the shortage of labor that we've had in the States. So learning that and understanding what motivates that younger generation has been something that I've had to learn. As an example, I come from the school of that when you are post a job and you interview people and you're the candidate, you need to sell me on why I should hire you. But a lot of that has shifted. I mean, you're doing a short course on this as well on recruitment, right?
Yep.
It has shifted so much, at least for us. I'm curious as to whether it's the same, Troy, in Australia. But now we have to do equal selling. I have to convince you as to why this is an opportunity for you. Is that what you're finding as well?
Yeah, definitely. I don't think it's just the recent labour shortage. It's been much more of a movement. People, COVID was a wake-up call of people not wanting to work for shitty managers anymore. 70% of people quit their manager, not the job. They are now becoming a lot more careful about where they choose to work and who for or with. And it's just so important to advertise and market yourself as a great place to work these days.
Absolutely. As an older guy, 59, I'll be 60 next month, you can fight that as a business owner, as I see a lot of people do, or realize. Here's the way I've summarized it, because it's easy to say, oh, these millennials or these young people, they don't have the work ethic that we had. I say BS to all of that, and I'm sure you do as well. What they have figured out, because we set the example for them, is that they don't want to end up where we ended up. I'm generalizing. They don't want to end up where their parents that after 20, 30 years working somewhere, they get laid off at a moment's notice, right? They have seen that. And so they're smarter about that than we are. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I totally agree. And there's obviously a huge movement of people, not just the Great Resignation, but moving towards working for themselves, for that
That's right.
Autonomy and de-risking their careers. Are you a small business owner who is ready to take your professional growth to the next level? Sign up to the Grow a Small Business Weekly newsletter. This is your go-to email every Friday and will take about 2 minutes to read. Join the Grow a Small Business community who, like you, are investing in their professional development. Each week, we curate valuable resources, whether it's expert advice, books, podcasts, industry insights, or actionable strategies. We've got you covered. Leave your email at growasmallbusiness.com/weekly. What have you enjoyed the least about managing fast growth?
I think that, the labor challenges are part of it. I think it's how do you make these decisions about where do you invest to continue that fast growth? And those are, those fall into that category of crystal ball decisions that we're supposed to make. So you want to be bullish about your business, but at the same time, that realistic side of you says, well, what if it plateaus and I've made all these investments? When do I hire? What do I do? How do I invest in machinery or whatever the case might be? So I think those are some of the things I've struggled with the most in dealing with high growth or rapid growth.
What do you love most about growing a small business?
Well, just the excitement of it, the success of it, seeing other people flourish, putting, again, something out there into the marketplace and it being well received. There's no greater satisfaction, I think, for an entrepreneur.
What has been the biggest mindset shift for you in your small business growth journey?
I think the one we just talked about how I think of and perceive what motivates employees, especially younger employees. So that's been a big part of it. And also going back to another lesson that I took from COVID, Troy, is that I saw so many business owners from my vantage point who looked at it, admittedly, it was catastrophic for so many business owners. So I'm not trivializing this, but what it highlighted for us significantly was that is business. In other words, we don't know what's going to happen next. We don't have that crystal ball. We cannot fully predict what might happen, whether in the way of government regulation or something as extreme as COVID. I don't know how we would have prepared for that. But you know what I mean? It helped me realize that in business ownership, we don't know what the future will bring. This is one of the reasons why I am on the side of, if you have an opportunity to sell your business and the numbers make sense, you should seriously consider it, because I don't know what I don't know and what could happen 2 years from now that impact my ability to make the kind of money I'm making now.
Yeah, good point. A good mate, late 1999, built up a website doing 35 million visits a month, sold it within 6 or 9 months. And I said, why didn't you keep going? And that was early 2000s, and the dot-com crash happened, 6 months later.
Wow.
So, and he just knew I probably would have sat in and, all the value evaporated, and he retired at age, 25, 26. So it is 20/20 vision in hindsight, but it's having that strength to say, no, that's enough. I'm out.
Good for him.
the number one habit you think a small business owner needs to develop and maintain?
I think it's discipline, because we need to have the discipline to keep fighting, to keep persevering. I think that's one of the reasons our health and our business go hand in hand. How we take care of ourselves mentally, physically go hand in hand. So I think that discipline to stick to things.
Yeah. Now, you've obviously would have employed a lot of people over the now 32 years of your business career. So can you talk to how you've added people to the team, some wins, mistakes, and advice for those listening?
Yeah, I think that you talk about this, and I think is one of the points you covered in this course that you're doing, which is to hire A players, to hire people better than you. I think that as entrepreneurs, we bring ego to the game. There's no doubt about that, right? If we didn't have an ego, we would be doing this. We have a lot of confidence in ourselves, right? We bet on ourselves and in our team. And I learned this in my corporate career initially. When I worked, the last company I worked for, Ariba, they got acquired by SAP, as I mentioned. I was in the room with a lot of smart people. I was far from the smartest person in the room. And that was amazing. That when people asked me after I left that career what I missed the most, there were two things: being on stage presenting, when you get that thrill if you've got an audience. I'm talking about small audiences in corporate America. When you're presenting and you're communicating effectively, there's nothing like that. But secondly is being around highly intelligent people and what does for you all around. So that is something I think we have to do. But then the challenge is you're only going to attract and keep those people if you're willing to empower them, if you're willing to allow them to help you grow your business. And that's one of the struggles I see that a lot of small business owners are challenged with, in particular because it becomes our identity, right? We often got to where we are early in our business career because we're the doers. We get stuff done. And then to make that shift to say, I'm going to allow others to make these decisions, to do these things, it can impact our identity. So learning that's my role eventually, to become the leader of that organization, that's been very empowering.
Yeah. What are some things you recommend to building a sustainable and kick-ass culture to help with the growth?
Culture starts at the top. And so people, especially now, as we've talked about, read through the BS really quickly. I think there needs to be some level of transparency, some level of trust that you build with your team, and consistently do the things, keep your promises. I think that it is our number one responsibility, once we've gotten past that startup phase, is to nurture and cultivate that culture. But as an example, as it relates, for example, to customer service, we really focused on that at the yogurt shop, delivering remarkable customer experiences, which I got that term from Seth Godin's book, Purple Cow. We had read that book just before we started it. And I thought, this is what we're going to focus on. We had even a manifesto of what we were going to do, how we were going to behave, how we all behave. We would share that manifesto with interview candidates, that this is what we're about, how people self-qualify out. And so that portion of it, that focus on it, and then being truthful about it. In other words, here's where it falls apart. If we had not empowered our employees, now certainly for us, empowering our employees in that environment was relatively easy because they were empowered that if a customer, remember, it's self-serve. So one of the challenges we would have is somebody often would end up at the end of the line, sit down, and they're like, I hate this concoction I just made. These flavors just go together. Our staff was empowered to say, or sir, let me take that from you. Go make yourself another one. Now, again, we're talking about $5. So we're not talking about huge dollar value, but that is an example of empowering our employees to actually deliver on this. And so I think that was one of the examples that permeated the culture where they knew we were serious about this. We weren't just giving it lip service. It wasn't just the employee of the month plaque on the wall of the so many bad fast food restaurants that we have in the States. It was genuine, and it started at the top.
Yeah, and that starting it from the top. Have you read Jack Stack's book, The Great Game of Business?
Yes.
And my favorite saying in that book is a saying from Missouri, apparently, that shit rolls downhill.
Yep, love it. I need to reread that book. I read it. That came out quite some time ago, and I need to reread that book.
Yeah, 1991 it came out. I read second edition, early 2000s. I cannot believe I only listened to that book a month ago. A guest put me onto it, and it's one of the great things about doing a podcast is I learned so many other great resources and books. But yeah, that is a phenomenal book. That's
one of the questions I ask, as you probably know, at the end of my shows, is a book recommendation.
Yeah, and it's akin to, have you read Maverick by Ricardo Semler?
I have not.
That is a great book. Argentina, early 1980s, hyperinflation, took over his dad's industrial business, creating
I think I did read that.
Dishwashers and giant propellers and things like that. And the thing I love about that book is that they were basically from the culture that he set from the top down. Day one, he fired the board after his dad left for a holiday for 10 months, but they were the crash tests dummies of basically management styles of how to grow a business fast with such an amazing backdrop of that hyperinflation. But they tried every management style under the sun in the 80s and just kept iterating and changing, kept what worked. But it's similar to Jack Stack's book.
Yeah, I did read that. Doesn't he end up turning the company ownership over to the employees? Is that?
Yep. Decentralizes the business, but it decentralizes a lot of the decision making as well. So brings the team right into it. It's terrific book.
Yeah, he's a brilliant guy. Loved that book. I did read that book. It's fantastic.
And tell our audience how you've handled balance.
I have come to understand, and I've been told this by others as well, that there is no such thing as separating the two. So for me, balance comes back to the point I made earlier about the freedoms that I get from my businesses and that I require from any business that I go into, which is those freedoms of time and location to an extent, to a point. So that's how I strike a balance. I believe in working extremely hard, but I also believe in taking the time off and making the schedule work for me and my family. That's how I strike a balance.
And how much professional development have you invested in yourself over the decades?
Quite a bit. Everything from coaches to courses and programs. You keep in mind, as I said, I don't have a college degree. I did go to junior college, but I didn't have much there. So my education has come from reading. Of course, now I listen to other podcasts, but reading, I'm an avid reader, and then coaching along the way.
And what about mentors? Have you had any mentors?
I have. I was really bad at this early on, Troy. I was definitely the type that thought, I got this, I'll figure it out on my own. And then it was only later that I realized the value of networks and of mentorships. And it's one of the reasons why I prefer to partner. So David Begin has been a partner and also a mentor. I think we've been mentors to each other. We balance each other. So I've come to realize as I've gotten older, the value of having mentors. I wish I would have sought out more mentors when I was younger.
Me too. Yeah, kind of ego gets in the way, I think.
Exactly.
Young upstart at age 26. Do you have a board of directors or advisors currently?
Not a formal board of directors. Of course, I don't have a large business right now. So my advisors continue to be David Begin. We're not in partnership in any business right now, but we continue to bounce ideas off each other, help each other with our businesses. And then I've got 2 or 3 other people that fall into that category. I've got a friend who's also an attorney in New York who I'll bounce ideas off of. So it's more informal right now.
And you're one of the few we've had on that's exited a business. Any advice for those listening thinking of exiting one day?
I put it this way. The 2 toughest decisions a business owner has to make is to shut it down when it's not going well. When do you decide, I got to shut this down, can't put any more money into it, either because I don't have it or it doesn't make sense. That's hard to give up, to say, I'm defeated, I got to move on. That's hard. That's what we did with that second yogurt location. But I think even harder is when you have a successful business, as we already talked about, to sell it. Because there is a lot of things going on there. One is the financial aspect. Well, heck, I'm making all this money. And by the way, when you get advice from others who are not business owners, like your accountant or your advisor, I have found that they always tell you, well, you're not going to be able to replace that income. And what are you going to do with that money? And you're going to have a tax hit. They're going to give you the advice that not to sell, typically. That's what I have gotten. But they're not business owners for a reason. So I think that you have to look at it again from the perspective of, if I can get the right multiple and I can take that money off the table, if you will. I'm not a gambler, but if I was, it's akin to saying, I'm going to take all my chips off the table and then redeploy or rebalance or reinvest, because I don't know how things are going to play out a year or 2 from now, which is the liability that we all have while we run that business. Some businesses more than others, but we still have those liabilities. We don't know. There's no guarantee. But if I take these earnings off the table at the right multiples, I can now reallocate that money. So I think it's a mindset thing. The other thing that I have found, and my partner, David Begin, we've talked about it in the show, struggled with this. He was the car wash guy for 12 years. It became his identity. He was known in the industry because we had such successful high margin car washes. He was sought after. He was the president for a period of time of the International Car Wash Association. It became his identity. When we sold, he has struggled. He's still struggling to some extent with not being that guy anymore or that gal anymore. So that's something I think we have to think about as well. But I always believe that everything is always for sale at the right price.
Yep, totally agree. Have you read Built to Sell?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Great book. Yeah.
I've had John on the show. He's a great guest.
Yeah, we had him on a few months ago now on the cast, and I've just started listening to his podcast as well. I'll send you through. There's a great one. An Aussie actually moved to London, won the UK Apprentice 2014, built his digital agency up to 130 team members in 8.5 years,
Wow.
fucked everything up, made all the mistakes early on, as we all do, but learnt very fast. And then you'll love this, Henry, he sold. So Lord Sugar was his business partner, obviously gave him £250,000, and the founder wanted to exit in 6 years down the track, and he asked Lord Sugar what EBITDA multiplier should should we get that you'd be happy with? And his industry average in the UK was 3 to 4 times. And anyway, Lord Sugar said 5 times. So anyway, went the guy to research how to sell, etc. 2 years later, he hadn't worked in the business for 2 years by the time they sold 2.5 years later, but 9.5 times EBITDA they got.
Wow. Fantastic.
I'll shoot you through that. That's great.
Yeah, I'd love to see. I love him. A couple of other things on selling a business. First is, I believe, whether you plan to sell or not, that you should build a business as if you're going to sell. It's similar to what Michael Gerber talks in the E-Myth, as if you're going to build 100 units, even though you may have just one location. And so a couple of things that means, as you teach and understand as well, as systems, making sure we have clean financials, making sure it's not dependent on me. All of those things that would make a business saleable are the same things that let us get to the point where the business does not consume us, is what I have found.
Yeah, great advice. All right, Henry, wanted our final 5 questions. What do you think is the hardest thing in growing a small business?
I think it's dealing with the unforeseen, as I mentioned before. We are expected as business owners to make decisions, and we need to embrace that decision making that is based on just the data, the way the wind is blowing. We're supposed to predict the future, and I think that's hard.
Yeah, favorite business book would just help you the most?
I mentioned that the E-Myth is a great one, although I did see that you mentioned Deep Work, because I've read that, and that's interesting concepts. I found it, to be honest, a little bit of a slow read, but must understand these concepts of deep work.
Yep, Cal Newport, great book. Any great podcasts or online learning tools you use for your own professional development?
I listen to a lot of different shows. I listen to your show. I listen to a lot of different shows, and I was thinking about this question. I think reading books is still my number one source of learning. So I would say reading books is still number one for me.
One tool you'd recommend to help grow a small business?
I think depending on your business, and often it's your CRM or your POS, depending on your business, but those kind of tools, which are so accessible to us now, there's no reason not to have them, especially a CRM tool, if that's the type of business that you're in. So having those critical systems, technologies in place, I think is how I would answer that.
Final and my favorite question. What would you tell yourself on day one of starting out 32 years ago?
Oh gosh, it's what I eventually told myself when we started the yogurt business, which I made a conscious decision of enjoying the journey, as opposed to I'll celebrate, I'll enjoy this once we're at 200 units. So enjoy the journey.
Great. Excellent advice, and really enjoyed the chat today, Henry. I'm sure we could go for another couple of hours talking about business.
Exactly.
Congratulations on a fantastic and diversified business career you've had over those 3+ decades. Some really interesting businesses in there, and congratulations.
Thank you, Troy. I appreciate having the conversation, and thanks for having me on your show.
We're getting some great iTunes reviews. For those listening, please pop over to your podcast app and leave us a review.